My fiancé demanded 50% of everything. I smiled, agreed immediately, gave her exactly half. Half the debt, half the bills, half the loans, while I'd already moved my real wealth to trusts she never knew existed. Hey Reddit, I want 50% of everything you own, Melissa said, her manicured fingernails drumming against the marble countertop. It's only fair since we're getting married. I looked up from my coffee, the morning light streaming through our penthouse windows casting shadows across her face. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten, not the words themselves, but the calculated delivery, like she'd rehearsed this moment. 50%, I repeated slowly. Of everything. Everything, she confirmed, crossing her arms. The condo, your investments, your business accounts. We should combine finances now, before the wedding. Full transparency, full partnership. I'm 29. I've been engaged to Melissa for 8 months, together for 2 years before that. We live in a luxury condo in downtown Seattle that I bought 5 years ago. She moved in last year after we got engaged. What she doesn't know could fill volumes. I set down my coffee mug with deliberate care. When did you start thinking about this? I've been thinking about it for weeks. She pulled out her phone, swiping through what looked like screenshots. I talked to some friends, did some research. In a real partnership, everything should be equal. My financial advisor said. Your financial advisor? I interrupted. Since when do you have a financial advisor? Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but I caught it. Since I started taking our future seriously. Don't you want us to be equal partners? The thing about traps is that they only work if you don't see them coming. Of course I do, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I just want to understand what brought this on. Did something happen? She softened slightly, moving around the counter to stand next to me. Nothing happened. I was talking to my cousin Tracy, and she said she wished she'd done this before she got married. Her divorce was messy because they never separated anything properly. I don't want that for us. We're not getting divorced, I pointed out. Obviously not. But that's what Tracy thought too. She took my hand, her thumb running across my knuckles. Come on, baby. This is about trust. About building something together. 50-50, like real partners. I studied her face. The face I'd woken up next to for the past year. The face I'd imagined in a wedding dress. The face that was currently hiding something behind those carefully practiced expressions. Okay, I said. She blinked. Okay. Yeah. 50% of everything. You're absolutely right. I squeezed her hand and smiled. Let me set up a meeting with my attorney this week. We'll get everything documented properly. The relief that flooded her face was almost comical. Really? Just like that. Just like that. If this is important to you, then it's important to me. I kissed her forehead. I'll make some calls today. She practically bounced with excitement. God, I love you. Tracy is going to be so impressed. She kept saying you'd fight me on this, but I told her you were different. I am different, I agreed, taking another sip of my coffee. What I didn't say was how different. The meeting with my attorney, Patricia, happened 3 days later. I went alone, told Melissa it was just preliminary paperwork, that we'd both sit down together once everything was organized. Patricia's office overlooked the sound, all glass and steel and expensive furniture that whispered rather than shouted wealth. She'd been my father's attorney before he died, and she'd guided me through the labyrinth of trusts, holdings, and structures he'd left behind. So, Patricia said, sliding her reading glasses down her nose. She wants 50% of everything. Everything, I confirmed. And you said yes. I said yes. She leaned back in her leather chair, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And she has no idea about the trusts. None whatsoever. My father had been a financial planner, the kind who worked with old money and new money alike, teaching them how to protect what they'd built. He died when I was 23, leaving me with an inheritance that would have made most people's eyes water. But here's the thing about real wealth. It's almost never in your name. The condo I lived in, owned by the Harrison Family Living Trust, established in 1987. The investment accounts Melissa had seen statements for, those held about 8% of my actual liquid assets. The business accounts she mentioned? Real, yes, but connected to my software consulting firm that grossed maybe $200,000 a year. Everything substantial. The real estate portfolio worth north of $12 million. The index fund positions, the private equity stakes, the bonds, the offshore accounts my father had legally established decades ago. All of it sat in a web of trusts and corporate structures that had my father's fingerprints all over them. I was a beneficiary, not an owner. On paper, I looked successful but not wealthy. Comfortable, not rich. And I'd never corrected Melissa's assumptions. She's going to find out eventually, Patricia warned. When you actually marry, there will be disclosures. I know, I said, but that's not what this is about. I need to understand what she's really after before I make any permanent decisions. Patricia pulled out a legal pad. All right, let's build her exactly what she asked for. 50% of everything she knows about anyway. The next week, I sat Melissa down with spreadsheets, account statements, and documentation. Okay, I said, sliding the first stack of papers across our dining table. You wanted full transparency. Here it is. Her eyes lit up as she reached for the papers. So, the condo, I began. Market value is about $900,000. We'll add your name to the title, giving you a 50% ownership stake. She nodded, already scanning the documents. The joint checking and savings accounts. I pointed to the next set of papers. Currently holding about $48,000 combined. That's already joint, so we're good there. What about your investment accounts? She asked, flipping through pages. Here, I pulled out the Charles Schwab statements. Roth IRA has about $60,000. Traditional IRA has $90,000. Brokerage account has another $130,000. We'll need to adjust beneficiaries on the IRAs. You can't legally own those jointly, but the brokerage account we can make joint. She was nodding along, clearly doing math in her head. Business account for the consulting firm has about $70,000. We can make that joint too, though I prefer to keep business finances somewhat separate for tax purposes. But if you want it 50-50, we can restructure. No, that makes sense, she said quickly. Business is different. Great. So, rough numbers. We're looking at about $1.3 million in total assets, which means your 50% stake is worth about $650,000. I watched her face carefully. She was pleased, definitely, but there was something else there. Calculation. Like she was comparing this number to something else in her mind. That's fair, she said finally. When can we make it official? Patricia is drawing up the papers now. But Melissa, there's something else we need to talk about. Her smile faltered. What? If you're getting 50% of the assets, you also get 50% of the liabilities. What liabilities? I pulled out another stack of papers. The condo has a mortgage. About $340,000 remaining. You'll be assuming half of that, $170,000. She frowned. I thought you owned it outright. I could have paid it off, I said truthfully. But the interest rate is 2.8%, and my investments were earning more than that. So it made financial sense to keep the mortgage and invest the difference. Basic arbitrage. Okay, she said slowly. What else? Business loan for equipment and software licenses. $40,000 remaining. You'll take on $20,000 of that debt. Her frown deepened. Student loans from business school. $60,000 left. You get $30,000. Wait. And there's a personal loan I took out 2 years ago for some investments. $80,000 remaining. You'll assume $40,000 of that. I slid a calculator across the table. So, your 50% of assets is $650,000. Your 50% of liabilities is $260,000. Your net position is $390,000. The excitement had completely drained from her face. I didn't realize there was so much debt. It's all good debt, I assured her. The interest rates are low, the cash flow is managed. This is how wealth building actually works, leverage. But if we're truly going 50-50 on everything, that includes the leverage. She stared at the papers, her jaw working. There's one more thing, I said quietly. Ongoing expenses. If we're combining everything, you'll be responsible for half of all bills. The condo HOA fees are $1,800 a month. Your half is $900. Property taxes are about $15,000 annually, so you'll cover $7,500 per year. Insurance, utilities, maintenance. I've got it all itemized here. I slid another spreadsheet across. Your monthly obligation for half of everything will be about $4,000. Her face had gone pale. $4,000 a month. That's the cost of 50% ownership, I said simply. Unless you want to reconsider? She looked at the numbers, then at me, then back at the numbers. I could see the wheels turning, see her trying to figure out if she'd been outmaneuvered or if this was still somehow a win. I need to think about this, she said finally. Of course. Take your time. But Melissa, I waited until she met my eyes. Why did you really want this? What do you mean? I mean, 2 weeks ago, we were planning a wedding and talking about honeymoon destinations. Then suddenly you want to restructure our entire financial relationship. What changed? She stood up, gathering some of the papers. Nothing changed. I told you, I was just talking to Tracy. Tracy got divorced 3 years ago. I interrupted. I remember because you went to her wedding. We'd only been dating 6 months. Why is her divorce suddenly relevant now? It's not. She fumbled with the papers. I'm going to go for a walk. I need some air. She grabbed her purse and left, leaving the documents scattered across the table. I sat there alone, looking at the spreadsheets I'd carefully prepared, and pulled out my phone. The email from Patricia was timestamped from this morning. Got the background check you requested. You'll want to see this. I opened the attachment. Melissa's cousin Tracy, the one supposedly warning her about divorce, had never been married. But Tracy's brother, Carter, had just launched a tech startup. A startup that was desperately seeking seed funding. A startup that, according to the incorporation documents Patricia had pulled, listed Melissa as a potential investor. Investor with what money? I scrolled further. There were text messages, pulled from Discovery in an unrelated case that had tangentially involved Carter's business partner. Messages between Melissa and Carter discussing getting access to capital and convincing him to restructure. And, once it's joint, we can move it. I sat back, my coffee long cold, and started laughing. She hadn't wanted a partnership. She'd wanted a withdrawal. Melissa came back 3 hours later, her face flushed from cold or emotion or both. I talked to my financial advisor, she said, dropping her purse on the counter. And he said the debt situation complicates things. He suggested we might want to do a post-nuptial agreement instead. Keep things separate until the loans are paid down. A post-nup, I repeated. After you were so insistent on combining everything. It just makes sense to wait until the financial picture is clearer, she said, not meeting my eyes. No point in me taking on debt when we could just wait. Wait for what? For the debt to be paid off. That could take years, I pointed out. Unless I liquidate investments to pay it down faster. Is that what you want? She perked up slightly. Would you do that? I could. I'd take a tax hit, and I'd lose the long-term growth potential. But if it means we could move forward with combining finances sooner. I trailed off, watching her face carefully. How much could you access quickly, she asked. From the investment accounts? Probably most of it. Maybe 300,000 liquid within a few days. Enough to clear everything except the mortgage. Her eyes gleamed. And then we'd be debt-free. I'd be debt-free, I corrected. Unless we're already combined by then. Is that what you're suggesting? I liquidate the investments, clear the debt, and then we combine everything. She nodded eagerly. Doesn't that make more sense than me taking on debt? It would, I agreed slowly. Except then you'd be getting 50% of cleaned-up assets without having shared the liability burden. That's not really equal partnership. Her expression soured. I'm trying to be practical. So am I. I pulled out my phone, opening the email from Patricia. Tell me about Carter's startup. The blood drained from her face so fast, I actually felt a twinge of concern. What? Your cousin's brother. Carter. The tech startup that needs seed funding. The one you're listed as a potential investor for. I turned the phone around, showing her the incorporation documents. She grabbed for the phone, but I pulled it back. Don't, I said quietly. Don't make this worse by lying. She stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing. The whole 50% thing, I continued, keeping my voice level. It wasn't about partnership or Tracy's divorce or any of that. You wanted access to capital for Carter's startup. How much did he ask you for? It's not like that. How much, Melissa? 200,000, she whispered. It's a good investment. The company is solid. They just need initial funding too. To what? To maybe succeed? To possibly become profitable? I shook my head. You were going to take my money and gamble it on your cousin's startup without even asking me. I would have told you eventually, she said, tears starting to form. I just knew you'd say no if I asked directly. You're so cautious with money, and this is a real opportunity. I'm cautious because I understand what wealth actually means, I said. And you know what? If you'd just been honest, if you'd come to me and explained the situation and asked for help, we could have had a conversation. I might have even said yes to some amount as a gift to help your family. But instead, you tried to manipulate me into restructuring our entire relationship so you could access what you thought was my money. It would have been our money, she protested weakly. No, I said firmly. It wouldn't have. Because you weren't thinking about us. You were thinking about Carter and Tracy and whatever promises they made you. She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Carter said if I didn't help, he'd lose everything. And Tracy said you had plenty of money and wouldn't even miss it. Tracy doesn't know anything about my finances, I said. And neither do you, apparently. She looked up at me through tears. What do you mean? I mean the investment accounts and the condo and the business account. That's not my real money, Melissa. That's my spending money. My emergency fund. The money I used to live on. Then where? Where's the real money? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. In places you never thought to ask about. In structures my father set up before I even graduated college. In trusts and holdings and accounts that were never in my name to begin with. Her eyes widened. How much? Enough that 200,000 would have been a rounding error. Enough that if you'd been honest with me, I could have helped Carter without even noticing the expense. I stood up, walking to the window. But you weren't interested in honesty. You were interested in a con. It wasn't a con, she said desperately. I love you. I want to marry you. The thing with Carter was separate. Was it? I turned to face her. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been planning this for weeks. The financial advisor you suddenly have. The conversations with Tracy. The perfectly timed demand for 50-50 splitting of assets. That's not love, Melissa. That's a strategy. She sank into a chair, her whole body shaking. What are you going to do? I'm going to give you exactly what you asked for, I said calmly. 50% of everything. You'll get your name on the condo title, along with 50% of the mortgage debt. You'll get joint access to the investment and business accounts, along with 50% of the loan obligations. You'll get 50% of all the bills, all the expenses, all the responsibilities. I don't want that anymore, she whispered. I know, but that's the deal you demanded, and I agreed. The papers are already drawn up. I pulled out my phone again. Patricia will have them ready tomorrow. We'll make it all legal and binding. You're doing this to punish me. I'm doing this to show you the difference between partnership and parasitism, I corrected. A real partner would have talked to me, would have been honest about her family's needs, would have trusted me enough to ask for help instead of trying to trick me into it. I do trust you. You trust my money. That's different. I picked up my coffee mug, cold now, and dumped it in the sink. You've got until tomorrow morning to decide. You can sign the papers and accept 50% of everything, assets and debts. Or you can move out, and we'll call off the engagement. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. I looked at her, this woman I'd planned to marry, and felt nothing but disappointment. You wanted transparency, Melissa. You wanted to see what I was really worth. Congratulations. You're about to find out. She signed the papers. I don't know what I expected. Maybe for her to call my bluff, to refuse, to pack her bags and leave. But she sat in Patricia's office the next morning, her signature shaky but present, and agreed to every term. 50% ownership of the condo, 50% of the mortgage debt, joint access to the investment accounts, joint responsibility for the outstanding loans, 50% of all monthly expenses. Patricia walked us through every page, making sure Melissa understood what she was agreeing to. The woman had the grace to look uncomfortable, at least. Just to confirm, Patricia said, adjusting her glasses. You understand that this agreement makes you jointly and severally liable for all listed debts? That means creditors can pursue you for the full amount, not just your 50% share. Melissa nodded mutely. And you understand that your monthly financial obligation, as outlined in Schedule C, is approximately $4,000 per month in mortgage payments, HOA fees, property taxes, insurance, and utilities? Another nod. Ms. Chun, I need verbal confirmation. I understand, Melissa said quietly. Patricia looked at me, one eyebrow raised. I nodded, and she continued. There's one additional item, Patricia said, pulling out another document. Given the significant debt assumption, I've prepared a payment schedule. Melissa, your first payment of $4,000 is due in 15 days. Melissa's head snapped up. 15 days? The agreement is effective immediately, Patricia explained. The monthly obligations begin with the next billing cycle. That's 2 weeks from today. I don't have $4,000, Melissa said, panic creeping into her voice. Patricia looked at me. I looked at Melissa. You have a job, I said. You make about $60,000 a year as a marketing coordinator. That's $5,000 a month after taxes. $4,000 goes to the house expenses, which leaves you $1,000 for everything else. That's impossible. I can't live on $1,000 a month. It's challenging, I agreed. That's why I've been making more aggressive career moves, taking on extra consulting projects, building multiple income streams. Welcome to the real cost of the lifestyle you've been enjoying. Her face crumpled. This is cruel. This is exactly what you asked for, I said calmly. 50% of everything. Equal partnership. Equal responsibility. I'll never be able to get ahead paying $4,000 a month. That's true, I acknowledged. Of course, there is one option. She looked up hopefully. You could sell your share back to me, I said. Your 50% equity in the property is worth about $450,000, the condo value minus half the mortgage. If you sold that back to me, you'd have enough to clear your portion of the other debts and have money left over. How much left over? After clearing your half of the loans, that's $260,000. You'd walk away with about $190,000. I could see her doing the math, see the appeal of immediate liquidity versus monthly obligations she couldn't afford. Or, I continued, you could try to make the payments and build equity over time. In 30 years, when the mortgage is paid off, your half would be worth whatever the condo is worth then. Probably a decent return if you can sustain the monthly burn rate. Patricia was watching this exchange with barely concealed fascination. I want to sell, Melissa said finally. I want to sell my share back to you. That's a big decision, I said. Maybe you should take some time. I want to sell, she repeated firmly. How soon can we do this? Patricia cleared her throat. I can have buyback papers ready in 3 days. Though I should note that there will be tax implications. I don't care, Melissa interrupted. I just want out of this. Out of the financial agreement. Patricia asked carefully. Or out of the relationship? Melissa looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time that morning. Both, she said quietly. I want out of both. I nodded slowly. Okay. That's it, she asked. Just okay. What do you want me to say? That I'll fight for us. That I'll beg you to stay? I leaned back in my chair. You tried to con me, Melissa. You saw me as a resource to exploit, not a partner to build with. Why would I fight to keep someone who thinks of me that way? She flinched. I never thought of it like that. Yes, you did. Maybe not consciously, but that's what it was. I looked at Patricia. Draw up the buyback papers. Let's make this clean. 3 days later, we signed again. I cut Melissa a check for $190,000, the equity value of her share minus her portion of the debts. She stared at it for a long moment before folding it carefully and putting it in her purse. What are you going to do with it? I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. I don't know, she admitted. Carter's startup already found funding elsewhere. Tracy isn't talking to me anymore. I think she's mad that I failed. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turns out they were just using me too. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. For what it's worth, I hope you figure things out. Are you really this rich? She asked suddenly. Or was that just another manipulation? I considered the question, considered all the trusts and holdings and structures that had my father's name instead of mine, considered the wealth that existed in theory, but not in my daily life. Rich is relative, I said finally. But yes, there are family assets I didn't tell you about. Assets I couldn't tell you about, because they're not mine to discuss freely. They're held in trust, managed by boards, distributed according to terms my father set up decades ago. Why didn't you just tell me that? Because it wasn't relevant, I said. When we met, when we dated, when we got engaged, none of that was about money. It was about us. At least, I thought it was. But the moment you started seeing me as a financial opportunity instead of a person, everything changed. She stood up, check in hand. I loved you, you know. Before all this. I really did. I know, I said. But love isn't enough when it's mixed with greed. You can't untangle those threads once they're twisted together. She left Patricia's office, and I watched her go. Patricia waited until the door closed before speaking. You know, you could have just said no when she first asked for the 50-50 split. I could have, I agreed. But then I wouldn't have known what she was really after. I wouldn't have seen who she actually was. And now I know. I stood up, gathering my own copies of the documents. And I'm 200,000 poorer, but infinitely wiser. Actually, Patricia said, a smile playing at her lips, you're not. The condo purchase was made through the living trust, remember? You were just the occupant, not the owner. So technically, you just bought out Melissa's interest in a property the trust owns, using trust funds. From a personal finance perspective, your net position hasn't changed at all. I stared at her. She never actually owned half the condo. She owned half of your residency rights, Patricia corrected, which, given the trust structure, is a very different thing legally than owning half the property. She just got $190,000 for signing away rights she never technically had. That's elegant, Patricia suggested. Your father set these structures up for exactly this kind of situation, to protect family wealth from relationships that don't work out. I gave her almost $200,000 for nothing. You gave her exactly 50% of what she was entitled to, based on the agreement you both signed, Patricia said firmly. The fact that the underlying asset structure was more complex than she realized is not your fault. You didn't lie. You didn't misrepresent. You gave her exactly what she demanded, half of everything she knew about. I sat back down, processing this. My father really thought of everything. He did, including making sure that anyone who loved you for you would never encounter these complications, but anyone who loved you for your money would find themselves navigating a maze they couldn't solve. Patricia closed her briefcase. Melissa failed the test. Be grateful you learned it now rather than after the wedding. A month later, I sat in the same penthouse, now legally and actually mine alone, and opened an email from Carter. His startup had failed. The funding they'd found had fallen through. The business partner had bailed, and the whole thing had collapsed in spectacular fashion. He'd lost everything he'd put into it, along with investments from several other family members who'd believed in his vision. Melissa had, apparently, invested her entire buyout check into the company right before it imploded. All $190,000 gone. Tracy was suing Carter. Carter was filing bankruptcy. The whole family was in chaos. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction in their failure. No pleasure in Melissa's loss. No vindication that my caution had been justified. Just a quiet sadness that people I'd cared about had made such destructive choices. I closed the email and pulled up my financial statements. The real ones. The ones that showed the trusts and holdings and structures my father had built. The ones that had weathered this storm without even trembling. My phone rang. Patricia, I heard about Carter's company, she said without preamble. Yeah, you could have prevented that. If you'd just given Melissa the money she wanted, invested in the startup, maybe it would have succeeded. Maybe, I agreed. Or maybe Carter was always going to fail because his business model was flawed and his execution was terrible. My money wouldn't have fixed his incompetence. Cold but fair. I could hear the smile in her voice. Your father would be proud. He always said the hardest part of wealth wasn't making it or keeping it. It was knowing when to help and when to let people fail on their own. I don't feel proud, I admitted. I feel tired. That's normal. You just dodged a bullet that would have followed you for the rest of your life. Give yourself time to process. We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. I stood by the windows, looking out at Seattle's skyline, at the city where I'd built my life and almost lost everything to someone who saw me as an ATM with a heartbeat. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I'm sorry. For everything. I hope you find someone who loves you for the right reasons. M. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I hope you do too. I deleted her contact, blocked the number, and turned back to the windows. Somewhere out there was someone who would see me as a person first and everything else second. Someone who would ask instead of manipulate, trust instead of scheme, build instead of extract. But until I found that person, I had my father's legacy, Patricia's wisdom, and the hard-learned lesson that the best investment anyone can make is in their own discernment. Melissa had demanded 50% of everything, and I'd given her exactly that. 50% of the carefully constructed facade I lived behind, 50% of the debts and obligations that came with it, and 100% of the consequences of her own choices. In the end, she'd gotten exactly what she asked for. She just hadn't asked the right questions. 6 months passed. I dated casually, nothing serious. I threw myself into work, expanding the consulting business, and taking on projects that challenged me. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during the Melissa years. And I started volunteering at a financial literacy nonprofit, teaching young adults about money management, debt, investing, and, most importantly, how to spot when someone's interest in you isn't genuine. One evening, during a workshop on trusts and estate planning, a young woman raised her hand. But isn't all this complexity just about hiding money from people? She asked. It seems dishonest. I thought about how to answer, about Melissa and Carter and Tracy, about my father's careful planning and Patricia's guidance. It's not about hiding money, I said finally. It's about protecting what you've built from people who see you as a means to an end. The structures don't lie. They just create separation between your personal life and your financial life. That separation lets you know if someone loves you or loves what you have. But doesn't that make relationships transactional? Someone else asked. No, I said firmly. Real relationships are never about transactions. But sometimes you need to create a test to separate the real from the fake. My father used to say that wealth is a magnifying glass. It makes everything bigger, clearer, more obvious. If someone loves you, wealth makes that love more secure and comfortable. If someone's using you, wealth makes that exploitation more visible and dangerous. After the workshop, a woman approached me. Mid-20s, professional but not pretentious, with kind eyes and a thoughtful expression. That story about the magnifying glass, she said. It sounds like you learned that lesson the hard way. I did, I admitted. Me too. She held out her hand. I'm Christine. I co-founded a tech startup that almost got destroyed by a co-founder who was more interested in equity than ethics. I paused, realizing I'd been about to introduce myself in the carefully casual way I always did, minimizing who I was and what I had. But something about her direct gaze made me reconsider. I'm someone who almost married someone who wanted to invest in her cousin's startup using money she thought was mine. Christine laughed, a genuine sound that filled the room. God, why are people like this? I don't know, I said honestly, but I'm learning to spot the warning signs. Me too. She tilted her head. Want to grab coffee and swap disaster stories? No expectations, no agendas, just two people who've learned hard lessons comparing notes. I thought about Melissa's demand for 50% of everything, about the careful trap I'd built to reveal her true intentions, about the money she'd lost and the relationship we'd destroyed. And I thought about the simple honesty in Christine's offer: coffee, conversation, connection without calculation. Yeah, I said, I'd like that. We exchanged numbers, agreed on a time, and parted ways. Walking back to my car, I called Patricia. I'm proud of you, she said when I told her about Christine. For what? Having coffee with someone. For being willing to try again. For not letting one bad experience make you cynical. She paused. Your father would have liked that. He always said the point of protecting wealth wasn't to isolate yourself. It was to make sure that when you did open up to someone, you could trust that they saw you, not your bank account. Thanks, Patricia. One more thing, she added. If this Christine woman starts asking about your financial situation. I know, I interrupted. Red flag. Test mode. Building the 50-50 trap. Good. I could hear the smile in her voice. But if she doesn't ask, if she's content to just know you as a person, maybe that's when you really have something. We hung up, and I drove home to my penthouse. Mine legally, mine actually, mine without complications or manipulations or hidden agendas. And for the first time in months, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future. Melissa had taught me what to avoid. Maybe Christine would teach me what to look for. Either way, I was ready. My father's trusts would remain hidden, doing their job quietly in the background. My personal wealth would stay personal, protected by structures designed to outlast any relationship. But my heart, battered, cautious, but still capable of hope, that was mine to risk. And this time, I'd make sure I was risking it on someone who deserved it. Someone who wanted partnership, not profit. Someone who would ask for honesty instead of demanding access. Someone who understood that 50% of everything means 50% of everything. The good, the bad, the debts, the dreams, the reality behind the facade. Someone who wanted all of me, not just the parts that came with dollar signs. As I pulled into my parking garage, my phone buzzed with a text from Christine. Looking forward to coffee. Fair warning. I'm going to judge you entirely on whether you put too much sugar in your latte. Financial status irrelevant. Hot beverage. I laughed out loud, typing back. Black coffee, no sugar. What's your judgment on that? Promising. See you Saturday. I parked the car and headed upstairs, feeling lighter than I had in months. Melissa had demanded 50% of everything and gotten exactly what she deserved. But maybe, just maybe, Christine would ask for nothing and get everything that mattered. Time would tell. And this time, I was patient enough to let it.